Previously, Humayun lost his empire, crossed deadly deserts, and was betrayed by his own brothers. But in Part 2, the fallen emperor returns to Delhi, where one final tragedy changes Mughal history forever. Babur, who would later establish the mighty Mughal Empire, was born in the small region of Fergana in Central Asia, east of Samarkand. In his writings, he described his father as a stocky man whose clothes fit so tightly they could sometimes split apart. But despite his physical appearance, his father was remembered as courageous, kind-hearted, and highly respected. He possessed great physical strength and a fierce ambition that often transformed peace into conflict and friends into rivals. In the summer of 1494, tragedy struck unexpectedly. While examining a structure built along the fortress walls, Babur's father lost his footing when part of the wall collapsed beneath him, sending him falling into the ravine below. After this sudden disaster, Babur became ruler of Fergana at only 12 years old. During that era, the lands of Central Asia were fractured into several rival states, constantly battling for control and influence. These kingdoms fought over the remains of the once powerful empires created by Timur and Genghis Khan. Many leaders claimed ancestry from these legendary conquerors, but Babur's bloodline connected him to both dynasties, giving him a powerful sense of destiny and legitimacy. Through his mother's family, Babur traced his heritage directly to Genghis Khan, the legendary Mongol leader who united scattered tribes into a massive empire. Stories surrounding Genghis Khan's birth claimed he entered the world holding a blood clot in his hand, believed to symbolize a future filled with conquest and warfare. By the time he died in 1227, his name had become feared across continents, and he was remembered as one of history's greatest conquerors. The armies of the great steppe warriors had once swept across enormous parts of the known world, leaving behind stories of conquest from Asia to Europe. Among the rulers connected to this legacy was Timur, one of Babur's powerful ancestors from his father's side. Known in Europe as Tamerlane, Timur rose from the nomadic Barlas tribes and built a massive empire stretching across Central Asia, with the legendary city of Samarkand as its shining capital. Like many great empires before it, Timur's kingdom did not remain united after his death. Instead of passing peacefully to a single heir, it fractured into smaller competing states, creating constant struggles for power across the region. Fergana, where Babur ruled, became one of these divided territories born from the collapse of a once great empire. Babur took immense pride in his Timurid roots and viewed that heritage as a symbol of strength and leadership. Although he also carried Mongol ancestry, he identified more strongly with the legacy of Timur and the Turkic traditions connected to his family's past. In later years, the dynasty Babur established in India would become famous throughout history as the Mughal Empire. During Babur's teenage years, one of the most influential figures in his life was his wise grandmother. Intelligent, strategic, and deeply respected within the royal household, she played a major role in guiding the young ruler through the dangerous political struggles surrounding him. Under her advice and protection, Babur began making bold military decisions at an incredibly young age. At just 14 years old, Babur took advantage of political chaos and civil conflict in Samarkand after the sudden deaths of rival rulers. Determined to reclaim the glory connected to his ancestors, he launched a campaign to capture the magnificent city that symbolized Timur's power and greatness. When Babur finally entered Samarkand, he admired its breathtaking gardens, elegant architecture, and the beauty left behind by Timur's reign. To him, the city represented far more than victory. It was a connection to the legendary empire of his forefathers and the dream of rebuilding that greatness once again. Although Timur was feared across much of the world as a ruthless conqueror, many historical accounts also describe him as a man who deeply admired beauty, structure, and carefully designed cities. Visitors who traveled through Samarkand spoke of magnificent gardens crossed by flowing water channels that moved peacefully beneath fruit trees and shaded pathways. Large resting platforms stood between rows of trees, creating calm spaces inside the royal gardens. Even though Timur came from a nomadic background and often lived in enormous silk-covered tents decorated with rich fabrics, he also left behind impressive mosques, domes, tombs, and buildings designed with remarkable symmetry and balance. For Babur, however, the glory of Samarkand faded almost as quickly as it arrived. After capturing the city at a young age, he soon discovered how unstable power could become. As the wealth and supplies of Samarkand began disappearing, many of his soldiers slowly abandoned him. At the same time, nobles back in Fergana used Babur's absence as an opportunity to remove him from power and replace him with his younger brother. Forced into a desperate situation, Babur had no choice but to leave Samarkand behind and rush back toward his ancestral kingdom. His first rule over the legendary city lasted barely 100 days. The defeat deeply wounded him emotionally. In his own reflections, Babur admitted that leaving Samarkand caused him great sadness and despair. For the young ruler, the city was more than territory or political power. It represented the glory of his ancestors and the dream of rebuilding their lost empire. During the next 2 years, Babur struggled constantly to regain control over parts of Fergana while facing betrayals, shifting loyalties, and political uncertainty. In the middle of these conflicts, he married in the year 1500, although his personal writings suggest that the marriage brought him little comfort or happiness. Babur often described himself during this period as shy, emotionally distant, and distracted by the pressures surrounding his unstable rule and uncertain future. Despite these personal struggles, Babur never abandoned his ambition to reclaim Samarkand. Central Asia remained trapped in constant conflict as rival rulers, tribal leaders, and military forces competed for the lands once ruled by Timur. Eventually, in July 1500, Babur succeeded in retaking Samarkand after the city had recently fallen under the control of Uzbek forces from the northern steppes. Yet even this second victory did not bring lasting peace. Babur's renewed control over Samarkand survived for less than a year before powerful enemies once again threatened his position. The young ruler remained surrounded by danger, political instability, and endless warfare, but his determination to restore his family's legacy continued driving him forward. Babur's second rule over Samarkand soon collapsed as Uzbek forces surrounded the city. Food and supplies became scarce, and conditions inside the walls grew extremely difficult. Many people struggled simply to survive. Unable to continue resisting, Babur quietly made peace and escaped with only a few loyal followers. At the same time, Uzbek forces advanced toward Fergana, leaving Babur without a kingdom or secure home. Later, Babur admitted that wandering through mountains without shelter or stability was one of the hardest periods of his life. During this dark time, news reached him from the south about Kabul, a city that would soon change his future. After Fergana and several remaining Timurid territories were lost to rival powers following the death of one of Babur's uncles, news from Kabul finally brought him hope again. The city had fallen into disorder under weak leadership, and Babur quickly decided to move toward it with the goal of taking control. As he advanced, more supporters joined his forces while the current ruler abandoned the city, leaving confusion behind. Babur later recalled that only brief violence followed before order returned and resistance ended. On the 14th of June 1504, at just 21 years old, Babur successfully entered Kabul and claimed it as his own. Unlike the unstable lands he had lost before, Kabul became both his political center and his personal home for the rest of his life. For the first time in many years, Babur was able to enjoy peace, stability, and time away from constant warfare. In Kabul, Babur focused deeply on his love for gardens, nature, books, and artistic culture. In his memoirs, known later as the Baburnama, he carefully described the gardens he created on hillsides surrounded by streams, orange trees, pomegranate plants, and green open meadows. He greatly admired the balance and beauty of these landscapes and often praised the calm atmosphere they created. Even after leaving Kabul for future campaigns, Babur continued sending instructions that his gardens should remain protected, watered, and filled with flowers. Babur also became increasingly devoted to literature and learning. Whenever he conquered new territories, he gathered valuable manuscripts and rare books to expand his royal libraries. During this period, handwritten manuscripts remained the primary source of education throughout Central Asia and Mughal lands. Babur himself wrote poetry and prose, while encouraging younger members of his court to study reading, writing, calligraphy, and literary arts. Babur understood that keeping his soldiers loyal required constant victories and fresh territories to reward them with. Determined to recover his lost inheritance, he launched new campaigns with Persian support against the Uzbek rulers who had seized Timurid lands. In 1511, Babur successfully regained Samarkand once again, the city he had long admired and considered the center of Timur's glory. Yet his success did not last. Within only a few months, Uzbek forces returned stronger than before and forced Babur to abandon the city for a third time. This final loss deeply changed Babur's ambitions. After years of struggling to reclaim Timur's old capital, he realized that holding Samarkand permanently would remain nearly impossible. Instead of continuing endless wars in Central Asia, Babur slowly shifted his attention toward the rich lands lying beyond the Khyber Pass, the region known as Hindustan in northern India. India already possessed an ancient civilization and a long political history stretching back thousands of years. Centuries earlier, Alexander the Great had crossed the Indus River and entered northwestern India, where he fought against powerful local rulers and large armies supported by war elephants. Although Alexander achieved military victories, his exhausted troops eventually refused to advance deeper into the subcontinent. Several generations later, Emperor Ashoka built one of the largest empires in Indian history, stretching across enormous territories from the mountains of Afghanistan to eastern India and the southern regions beyond the Deccan. His administration collected taxes from agriculture, trade, and other economic activities while enforcing strict control over land and resources. After Ashoka's death, however, the empire gradually weakened and fragmented into smaller regional kingdoms. Over the following centuries, different dynasties rose and fell across the Indian plains, while Turkic and Afghan groups slowly began moving toward the region from the northwest. As Turkic and Afghan rulers gradually moved deeper into India, they carried with them Islamic traditions, architecture, military systems, and artistic culture from Central Asia and Persia. Over time, these invading dynasties secured major victories and established control across large parts of northern and central India, weakening many older Hindu kingdoms. Yet powerful regional states still survived, especially the Rajput kingdoms in northwestern India, whose rulers continued resisting foreign domination for generations. India during this period was known across the world for its extraordinary wealth and natural resources. Its lands produced large quantities of grain, while its markets traded in precious stones, gold, iron, textiles, spices, and valuable dyes. For centuries, India remained one of the world's primary sources of diamonds and luxury goods. Although droughts and famines occasionally affected parts of the population, trade with Arabia, Persia, and regions of the Middle East continued to enrich merchants and royal courts. While ordinary people often lived difficult lives, many Hindu and Muslim rulers accumulated enormous fortunes and built magnificent cities and palaces. Among the most powerful Islamic states to emerge in India was the Delhi Sultanate. Over several centuries, different Muslim dynasties fought repeatedly for control over Delhi and its surrounding territories. Despite internal conflicts, the Sultanate expanded across wide regions including Bengal, Gujarat, Malwa, and parts of the Deccan. Delhi itself grew into one of the largest political and cultural capitals in the subcontinent. Yet the empire remained unstable, as distant governors frequently attempted to break away and establish independent kingdoms of their own. Long before Babur's arrival, his ancestors had already left their mark on India. In 1221, Genghis Khan approached the Indus frontier but eventually turned back. Later, in 1398, Timur launched a devastating invasion into northern India. Crossing the Indus River with a massive army, Timur advanced toward Delhi, destroying towns and defeating local forces along the way. When his army finally entered Delhi, widespread destruction followed, leaving the once great city in ruins and fear spreading across the region for months afterward. After Timur's invasion of India, countless craftsmen, builders, and artists were carried back to Samarkand to help expand the glory of the Timurid capital. Timur ordered the construction of splendid turquoise-domed buildings, tombs, gardens, and royal structures that would symbolize his power for generations. Skilled glassmakers arrived from Damascus, while expert metalworkers and silversmiths came from regions of Anatolia and Persia. Travelers and ambassadors who later visited Samarkand described the city as overflowing with workers, merchants, architects, and laborers. So many people had gathered around the capital that large numbers reportedly lived beyond the city walls, beneath trees and in temporary shelters carved into the surrounding land. The treasures seized during Timur's Indian campaign were so immense that the returning army moved slowly across the route back to Central Asia, weighed down by gold, goods, animals, and captured supplies. Although Timur remained in India for only a short period, he ensured his influence would continue after his departure. Before leaving, he placed the Sayyid rulers over Delhi in his own name, establishing a dynasty tied to Timurid authority. Even generations later, this connection would remain important to Babur, who viewed Hindustan as territory that could legitimately belong once more to the descendants of Timur. As Babur prepared for his own ambitions toward India, both his military strength and his family position grew stronger. His forces acquired advanced weapons, including cannons and matchlock muskets obtained through contact with the Ottoman Turks. Around the same period, Babur married Mahal Begum, who would later become one of the most important women in his household. In March 1508 she gave birth to a son, Humayun. Babur openly celebrated the child's arrival with enormous joy, arranging grand feasts and public celebrations. According to his own writings, silver coins were gathered in huge piles during the festivities, making the event one of the greatest celebrations he had yet witnessed. The name Humayun carried the meaning of fortune and prosperity, though Babur's future would still be filled with hardship, war, and uncertainty. Over time, More sons were born into the Timurid family, including Kamran, Askari, and Hindal, further strengthening the dynasty Babur hoped would one day rule a greater empire. Beginning in 1519, Babur launched a series of expeditions toward Hindustan while carefully studying the weakening political condition of northern India. The once powerful Delhi Sultanate, then ruled by the Lodi dynasty, had become divided by internal rivalries, distrust among nobles, and struggles between regional governors. Sensing opportunity, Babur marched through the snowy passes of Afghanistan, crossed the Indus River with his army, and advanced steadily across the plains of Punjab. Step by step, his attention moved toward the historic region near Panipat, where the future of northern India would soon be decided through battle. By the spring of 1526, Babur had advanced across the burning plains near Delhi, prepared to confront the army of Sultan Ibrahim Lodi. Ibrahim commanded an enormous force that greatly outnumbered Babur's men, with thousands of soldiers and massive war elephants gathered for battle. Despite being heavily outmatched, Babur relied on discipline, battlefield planning, and weapons rarely seen before in northern India. His army carried Turkish cannons and matchlock muskets, introducing a new style of warfare that many Indian forces had never faced. Babur carefully organized hundreds of wagons into a defensive barrier across the battlefield. Leather ropes linked the carts together while cannons and musketeers were positioned safely behind them. At dawn, Ibrahim's forces launched a direct assault, led by lines of charging war elephants. The thunder of Babur's artillery shattered the advance almost immediately. Cannon fire and musket smoke spread confusion through the enemy ranks as frightened elephants lost control and trampled soldiers around them. Seizing the moment, Babur's mounted archers attacked from the sides and rear, surrounding the disorganized army in chaos. The battle lasted only a few intense hours before Ibrahim Lodi was killed on the field along with thousands of his men. With this victory, Babur secured control over northern India and established himself as the new ruler of Delhi. Soon afterward, his name was publicly declared during Friday prayers, symbolizing his authority over the region. Babur then marched toward Agra, the former Lodi capital, where his son Humayun presented him with a magnificent diamond received from the royal family of Gwalior. The gem would later become famous throughout history as the legendary Koh-i-Noor, known as the Mountain of Light. Although Babur had conquered Hindustan, his first impressions of the land were mixed. He admired its enormous wealth and resources, yet he also criticized many aspects of life in the region. In his writings, he described the cities as lacking the beauty, order, gardens, flowing water, and architectural harmony he had admired in Central Asia. Even after becoming ruler, Babur continued comparing Hindustan to the refined culture and landscapes of his homeland, revealing both his pride as a Timurid ruler and the challenges of adapting to an entirely different world. Although Babur often criticized Hindustan for lacking the gardens, flowing water, and architectural harmony he admired in Central Asia, he also recognized the region's enormous wealth and skilled population. He wrote that the land possessed endless riches, valuable resources, and countless craftsmen capable of remarkable work. Among all artisans, Babur especially admired the stonemasons and builders of India, whose abilities reminded him of the great construction traditions of Timur's empire. Inspired by these talents, Babur soon began improving parts of Agra by designing carefully planned gardens along the banks of the Yamuna River. These gardens were arranged with geometric pathways, flowers, trees, and flowing water channels intended to bring order and beauty to the landscape. Despite his victories, Babur's rule remained surrounded by danger and political tension. He treated the family of the defeated Sultan Ibrahim Lodi with generosity and respect, allowing several members of the former court to remain under protection. Yet distrust continued inside the royal palace. According to accounts from Babur's court, an attempt was later made to poison him through food prepared by members connected to Ibrahim's household. Soon after eating, Babur became violently ill and nearly collapsed. Alarm spread throughout the palace as attendants rushed to help him while physicians searched desperately for a cure. Suspicion quickly fell upon the cooks and servants responsible for preparing the meal. Investigations and interrogations followed, leading to arrests among palace workers connected to the poisoning attempt. Babur later recorded that even animals were used to test the poisoned food, confirming that deadly substances had indeed been mixed into the meal. Although weakened and suffering greatly, Babur survived the attack after receiving medical treatment prepared from traditional remedies. The experience deeply affected him and reminded the new ruler how fragile power could be inside the courts of Hindustan. In the final years of his life, Babur spent much of his time securing his newly conquered empire while also continuing his interest in literature, memoir writing, and poetry. He worked on completing the Baburnama, the detailed account of his life, battles, ambitions, and personal reflections. Court records later connected Babur's declining health with the illness suffered by his son Humayun, whom he cared for deeply despite the burdens of ruling an unstable empire. Even while facing illness and constant political unrest, Babur continued shaping the foundations of what would later become one of the greatest dynasties in Indian history. Babur's greatest affection was reserved for his children, especially his eldest son Humayun, whom he considered not only an heir but also a beloved companion. When Humayun became dangerously ill and drifted into severe fever and delirium, fear spread across the royal court. Advisors and spiritual figures urged Babur to offer a valuable treasure in prayer for his son's recovery. Some believed that sacrificing one of Humayun's prized possessions, including the famous Koh-i-Noor diamond, might persuade fate to spare the young prince. Babur, however, rejected the idea of giving away jewels or riches. Instead, he declared that his own life should be offered in exchange for his son's survival. According to accounts preserved by the Mughal court, Babur walked around Humayun's bed in prayer, calling upon God to transfer the suffering from his son onto himself. Witnesses later described how Babur emotionally proclaimed that he would bear every pain if Humayun could live. Soon afterward, Humayun's condition slowly improved while Babur himself became increasingly weak and feverish. Many around him believed the emperor had sacrificed his own strength through devotion to his son. Whether viewed as faith, coincidence, or legend, the story became one of the most remembered moments of Babur's life. During the final months before his death in 1530, Babur's health steadily declined. Years of warfare, harsh travel, exhaustion, and indulgence in strong substances had weakened him physically. Yet even as illness overtook him, Babur remained focused on securing the future of the empire he had fought to create. He gathered loyal nobles and instructed them to recognize Humayun as the rightful successor to the Mughal throne. Babur also advised his son to avoid unnecessary cruelty toward his brothers, urging unity within the royal family despite the rivalries common among Timurid princes. After Babur's death, he was first buried in a riverside garden near Agra, close to the place where the Taj Mahal would eventually stand centuries later. Later, according to his wishes, his remains were carried back to Kabul and buried in the peaceful hillside gardens he had always admired. His tomb was left simple beneath the open sky, reflecting the traditions he respected and the personal humility he wished to preserve. Although Babur's reign over Hindustan had lasted only a few years, his victories, memoirs, gardens, and legacy laid the foundation for one of history's most powerful empires, while Humayun inherited both the throne and the immense responsibility left behind by his father. Humayun ruled the Mughal Empire with elegance and imagination, but his reign was also marked by instability, superstition, and dangerous habits. He believed colors and planets influenced human destiny, and he organized many parts of his life according to astrology. On Mondays he wore green robes and devoted himself to royal duties and celebration. On Tuesdays he dressed in fierce red garments and allowed anger to guide his actions. During these moods he could become cruel and unpredictable. Men accused of weakness or poor judgment sometimes faced brutal punishments. Humayun even ordered severe public executions, including beheadings and mutilations, believing harsh justice would protect imperial authority and frighten disloyal nobles into obedience. His personal weaknesses became worse because of his heavy addiction to opium. Court writers described how he regularly consumed the drug mixed with fragrant rosewater, drifting into long states of intoxication while government matters remained neglected. Under the influence of narcotics and luxury, Humayun lost the discipline and focus that his father Babur had once shown during war and conquest. Ministers waited for decisions while the emperor disappeared into pleasure, dreams, and ceremonies. As the Mughal ruler weakened himself, a far more disciplined rival rose in the eastern lands of Bihar. Sher Shah, an intelligent and patient Afghan commander, quietly expanded his control across Bengal and the Ganges region. Unlike Humayun, Sher Shah ruled with strict organization, military efficiency, and political calculation. He gathered loyal soldiers, strengthened alliances, and slowly transformed himself into the greatest threat facing the Mughal Empire. When Humayun finally realized the danger, he marched east with a massive imperial army. Yet his slow movements and poor strategy allowed Sher Shah enough time to prepare for battle. In 1539 the two armies clashed in a decisive conflict near the Ganges plains. Sher Shah's disciplined forces shattered the Mughal lines, throwing Humayun's camp into panic and confusion. Soldiers fled, commanders lost control, and the emperor's throne collapsed along with the empire's authority in northern India. During the desperate retreat, Humayun nearly drowned while attempting to cross the river. A loyal water carrier named Nazim saved the emperor's life by inflating an animal skin water bag and helping him float safely through the dangerous waters. Humayun later rewarded Nazim in a remarkable way. In front of nobles and courtiers, he briefly allowed the humble water carrier to sit upon the imperial throne itself. Though the honor lasted only a short time, the act shocked many aristocrats and royal officials, who believed such privilege belonged only to kings and princes. After losing his empire, Humayun fled toward Agra and then farther northwest to seek support from his half-brothers Kamran, Askari, and Hindal. But the Timurid royal family had become poisoned by rivalry and ambition. Instead of standing united, the brothers fought over power, territory, and wealth while rebellions spread across the collapsing empire. The downfall of Humayun revealed how addiction, luxury, internal betrayal, and weak leadership could destroy even a mighty dynasty. The empire Babur had built through years of hardship and conquest was overturned within a generation, leaving the Mughal throne in the hands of enemies while the rightful ruler wandered in exile far from the palaces he once commanded. Humayun wandered across broken lands with little more than fading loyalty around him. His brothers, Kamran, Askari, and Hindal, had each dreamed of carving out kingdoms of their own. Though Humayun repeatedly forgave them out of love for his father's final wishes, trust inside the royal family slowly collapsed. Their sister Gulbadan later wrote that whenever danger approached, the brothers gathered together in fear, debated endlessly, and still failed to agree on a single path forward. Behind closed doors, Kamran secretly attempted to negotiate peace with Sher Shah in hopes of securing Kabul for himself. Humayun, desperate to preserve even a fragment of his rule, privately offered Sher Shah another proposal. Hindustan would remain his if Lahore were spared and Sindh became the border between them. Sher Shah rejected every offer. As Sher Shah's armies advanced toward Lahore, panic spread through the city. Nobles, servants, soldiers, and merchants abandoned their decorated homes almost overnight. Gulbadan compared the scene to the Day of Judgment, saying entire palaces were left untouched as families fled with only what they could carry. Humayun escaped alongside Hindal and rode toward Sindh, where months passed in uncertainty and failed negotiations with local rulers. During this difficult exile, another unexpected story unfolded. Humayun became fascinated with Hamida, the young daughter of one of Hindal's spiritual advisors. She was only 14 years old, intelligent and strong-willed, and at first she openly resisted the idea of marrying the wandering emperor. Hindal himself disliked the proposal and argued against it fiercely. But Humayun remained determined. According to court accounts, Humayun's mother personally persuaded Hamida to reconsider. She reportedly told the young girl that every woman must someday marry, and that no husband could stand above a king without a kingdom. Slowly, resistance turned into acceptance. Humayun, deeply interested in astrology and omens, refused to arrange the marriage carelessly. He studied celestial charts with great seriousness, holding his astrolabe in his own hands while selecting what he believed to be the luckiest possible moment for the ceremony. At last, the marriage took place on the 21st of August 1541. Soon after the wedding, Humayun and Hamida crossed the burning deserts of Rajasthan while trying to regain support inside India. The journey became brutal. Sandstorms rolled across the horizon, supplies disappeared, and the summer heat exhausted both soldiers and animals. By then, Hamida was heavily pregnant, yet many officers still treated the royal couple with growing disrespect because Humayun no longer possessed a stable empire. One afternoon, humiliation struck openly. Hamida was left standing without a horse during the desert march because none of the commanders wished to surrender one of their own mounts. Realizing the shame of the situation, Humayun climbed down from his own horse and handed it to her without hesitation. For a time, the defeated emperor continued the journey through the desert seated awkwardly upon a camel while his followers watched in silence. The moment captured the collapse of a once mighty dynasty. An emperor without a throne, a pregnant young queen crossing hostile sands, divided brothers plotting survival, and an empire slipping further away with every mile of desert wind. Driven from his empire and surrounded by betrayal, Humayun finally reached the desert fortress of Umarkot with only a handful of loyal followers remaining beside him. The ruler of the town, who also feared Humayun's enemies, agreed to shelter the exhausted Mughal prince and his pregnant wife, Hamida Banu Begum. Far from royal palaces and golden courts, the future of the Mughal dynasty now rested inside a lonely desert settlement surrounded by heat, dust, and uncertainty. Then came the turning point. On the 15th of October 1542, Hamida gave birth to a son inside Umarkot. That child would later become the great Emperor Akbar. The birth brought rare joy to the struggling camp. Historians later wrote that astrologers immediately studied the stars and declared the child destined for greatness. Abul Fazl, Akbar's future court historian, would later describe the newborn as a shining blessing sent by fate itself. Humayun, despite having almost no kingdom left, ordered celebrations according to what little means he still possessed. But even the birth of his son could not save Humayun from danger. His enemies still surrounded him, and his own brothers, Askari and Kamran, continued working against him for power. Realizing that he could no longer survive alone, Humayun decided to seek help from the powerful Shah of Persia, just as Babur had once turned toward foreign alliances during difficult times. The journey toward Persia became one of the harshest moments of Humayun's life. Winter storms struck the traveling group as they crossed rough mountains and barren land. Food became scarce. Soldiers suffered freezing nights without proper shelter. Humayun later remembered how the bitter cold nearly froze his mind and body. Horses were killed for survival, and desperate men boiled meat inside metal helmets because proper cooking pots were no longer available. Since the road ahead was too dangerous for a baby, infant Akbar was temporarily left under the protection of Askari. Even during family rivalries, the safety of the child remained important. Humayun continued westward carrying only a few treasures, fading hope, and the dream of reclaiming Hindustan. In January 1544, Humayun finally entered Persia. Shah Tahmasp welcomed him with royal honor and generosity. Rich carpets, jeweled halls, and ceremonial guards surrounded the Mughal exile as the Persian ruler received him like a king without a throne. Wanting to secure military support, Humayun presented magnificent gifts from the Mughal treasury. Among them was the legendary Koh-i-Noor diamond, one of the most valuable gems in the world. Wrapped carefully inside luxurious cloth along with other precious jewels, the diamond was offered before the Persian court as a symbol of respect and desperation. Persian writers later claimed those jewels were so valuable they could repay the Shah's expenses for Humayun many times over. Yet the Shah's support carried conditions. Shah Tahmasp strongly encouraged Humayun, who followed Sunni Islam, to accept Shia customs practiced by the Persian Safavid Empire. Religious rivalry between Sunni and Shia powers had already shaped politics across the Islamic world for generations. Humayun now faced another difficult choice: protect his beliefs completely or compromise enough to regain an empire. While diplomats negotiated and armies prepared, baby Akbar remained far away, unaware that his birth had happened during the collapse of a dynasty. His father had lost a throne, crossed deadly deserts, offered priceless diamonds, and depended on foreign rulers simply to survive. Yet from those years of exile and hardship would eventually rise one of the most powerful emperors in Mughal history. After losing his empire and spending years wandering through deserts and foreign lands, Humayun finally realized that survival required compromise. While living under the protection of the Persian Shah, he agreed to follow certain customs practiced in the royal Persian court, even though they differed from the traditions he had grown up with. During that period, religious divisions between powerful Islamic kingdoms shaped politics, alliances, and wars across Central and South Asia. Humayun accepted these conditions not because he wished to abandon his identity, but because he understood that without military support he would never reclaim his throne. Once Persian assistance was secured, Humayun marched back toward Afghanistan with renewed determination. Backed by trained Persian forces, he launched campaigns against territories controlled by his own brothers. In 1545, he recaptured Kandahar from Askari Mirza and later reclaimed Kabul from Kamran Mirza, restoring two important cities once tied to Babur's legacy. These victories marked the beginning of Humayun's return from exile. In Kabul, He and Hamida Banu Begum were finally reunited with young Akbar after years of separation. The emotional meeting became one of the happiest moments in the Mughal family's difficult history. During the years of conflict, Babur's sister Khanzada Begum had often tried to keep peace between the brothers, acting as a respected mediator within the royal household. As stability slowly returned, celebrations filled Kabul once again. One of the most important ceremonies honored 3-year-old Akbar in a traditional royal family event attended by nobles, military commanders, and court officials. The city came alive with music, feasts, contests, and public gatherings as the recovering Mughal dynasty attempted to show strength and unity after years of chaos. Humayun personally joined several festive activities arranged for the court. Wrestling matches were organized between nobles and warriors as part of the celebrations, demonstrating courage, loyalty, and royal spirit. For many people around him, these ceremonies represented far more than entertainment. They symbolized hope that the Mughal Empire, once broken by defeat and betrayal, was beginning to rise again. Behind the celebrations, however, remained memories of hardship. Humayun had crossed burning deserts, survived freezing mountains, depended on foreign rulers, and fought members of his own family simply to return home. Yet standing once again beside Hamida and young Akbar inside Kabul, he could finally believe that the future of the Mughal dynasty still lived on. After years of exile, betrayal, and endless conflict, Humayun once again found himself trapped in struggles created by his own brothers. The Mughal Empire remained unstable, and even though the royal family had temporarily reunited, trust inside the dynasty had almost disappeared. Kamran Mirza and Askari Mirza repeatedly challenged Humayun's authority, hoping to secure power for themselves while different regions of the empire slipped into disorder. The situation grew darker in 1551 when Humayun's younger brother, Hindal Mirza, was killed during fighting connected to Askari's rebellion. Hindal had once stood beside Humayun during difficult years of exile, and his death deeply affected the emperor and the Mughal court. The loss also weakened whatever little unity still existed among Babur's sons. Even after so much betrayal, Humayun still showed hesitation when dealing with his brothers. Askari Mirza was not executed. Instead, Humayun ordered him to leave the empire forever and depart on a pilgrimage to Mecca, which in Mughal tradition was often used as a form of royal exile. Askari disappeared from political life after that journey. Kamran Mirza, however, refused to surrender his ambitions. He repeatedly tried to seize control of Kabul and challenge Humayun's rule. Twice Kamran captured Kabul, and twice Humayun fought to reclaim the city. Their rivalry exhausted the empire and divided many nobles between loyalty and fear. Finally, in 1552, Kamran was captured once again after losing support among his own followers. Humayun's advisors demanded severe punishment. According to court chroniclers, they warned the emperor that ruling an empire required strength, not endless forgiveness. They argued that Kamran was no longer acting like a brother but like a dangerous enemy threatening the stability of the throne itself. Humayun struggled emotionally with the decision because of family bonds and memories of their father Babur, but political reality eventually forced him to act. Rather than ordering execution, Humayun chose a traditional Timurid punishment used against rival princes, blinding. The punishment was carried out brutally. Guards held Kamran down while his eyes were destroyed so he could never rule again. Some historical accounts describe how salt and lemon juice were rubbed into the wounds afterward to intensify the pain and prevent healing. During the punishment, Cameron reportedly cried and admitted that his downfall had come from his own ambition and mistakes. Once the sentence was complete, he too was sent away on pilgrimage to Mecca, where he later died far from the empire he had fought so hard to control. Around this same period, fortune suddenly shifted in Humayun's favor. In 1554, news arrived from Hindustan that Islam Shah Suri, the son and successor of Sher Shah Suri, had died. His death created chaos among the Afghan rulers controlling northern India. Rival nobles and military leaders immediately began fighting each other for power, weakening the Sur Empire from within. Humayun recognized the opportunity at once. After spending years rebuilding his strength, he gathered loyal commanders and prepared to return to India. His young son Akbar accompanied him during the campaign. The Mughal army advanced steadily while enemy factions remained divided against each other. Humayun's return campaign moved rapidly across Punjab and toward Delhi. Several rivals were defeated one after another as Mughal authorities slowly returned. In July 1555, Humayun successfully recaptured Delhi and restored Mughal rule nearly 15 years after losing the throne during exile and defeat. Once back in power, Humayun focused less on conquest and more on intellectual interests that had always fascinated him. He loved books, poetry, astrology, and scholarly discussion far more than warfare. Inside Delhi, he transformed Sher Shah's former sandstone pavilion into a royal library known as the Sher Mandal. Rare manuscripts filled the building, including treasured writings connected to his father Babur that Humayun had carefully protected throughout years of wandering. Humayun also remained deeply interested in astrology and celestial movements. He believed planets and stars influenced human destiny and royal fortune. Court astrologers regularly gathered with him to discuss signs in the sky, lucky dates, and planetary alignments. He often wore specific colors on certain days based on astrological beliefs, continuing habits that had followed him for years. In the winter of 1556, Humayun spent evenings on the rooftop terrace of the Sher Mandal library discussing the night sky with scholars and astronomers. At that moment, the Mughal Empire had finally returned to his control after decades of rebellion, exile, suffering, and family betrayal. The emperor who had once wandered homeless inside the old fortress complex stood the Sher Mandal, a tall octagonal building of red sandstone that Humayun had turned into a private library and place for astronomical discussion. By this stage of his life, the Mughal emperor spent many evenings there surrounded by manuscripts, scholars, and court astrologers, far more interested in books and celestial signs than in warfare. One evening in early 1556, after spending time on the rooftop observatory discussing the stars and listening to scholars, Humayun prepared to return to his chambers below. As he approached the steep stone staircase of the Sher Mandal, the evening call to prayer echoed from a nearby mosque across Delhi. Following his custom, the emperor immediately paused in respect when he heard the sacred call. As Humayun began lowering himself on the narrow staircase, the long folds of his robe reportedly tangled around his feet. The sharp-edged stone steps beneath him offered little balance. In a sudden moment, he lost his footing and crashed downward. Witnesses later described how his head struck the stone heavily, causing a severe injury near his right temple. Blood flowed from the wound as attendants rushed toward the fallen emperor in panic. For several days Humayun drifted in and out of consciousness while members of the royal court waited anxiously beside him. Scholars, nobles, servants, and guards gathered around the palace as news of the emperor's condition spread through the capital. According to later accounts, During his final hours, Humayun quietly spoke words about hearing a divine call before slipping away. At the time of his death, Humayun was 47 years and 10 months old, only slightly older than his father Babur had been when he died years earlier. Much of Humayun's life had been shaped by exile, betrayal, wandering, and the struggle to reclaim the Mughal throne. Compared to the years he spent fighting to recover his empire, he had actually ruled in India for only a limited part of his lifetime. After Humayun's death, attention turned toward his young son Akbar, who had already accompanied his father through difficult campaigns and political uncertainty. The Mughal court now looked toward the future of the dynasty under the next generation of leadership, while the Sher Mandal remained forever connected to the emperor's final moments in Delhi. Humayun is gone, but the Mughal Empire is far from finished. In Part 3, young Akbar rises from chaos to build one of history's greatest empires.